My parents invited me home for the holidays, then turned me into the babysitter. The night I realized I had been invited home for the holidays as a favor, not a daughter, I was standing barefoot in my childhood kitchen, holding a baby monitor that wasn't mine, listening to someone else's child cry for a mother who wasn't coming. The oven clock blinked 12:00 like it always had during power cuts, the smell of cinnamon and pine still clinging to the air from decorations I hadn't put up, and my mother's voice floated in from the hallway, light and careless, saying, "It's just for a few days, Clara. You're so good with kids." In that moment, something old and tender inside me folded in on itself. I hadn't even taken my coat off yet. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from today? Are you in your kitchen, your car, or curled up somewhere quiet with your headphones on? And if this story touches something familiar, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend who might need to hear it too. My name is Clara, and today I'm telling you about the Christmas my parents invited me home for the holidays, then quietly turned me into the babysitter. I didn't see it coming. That's the part that still surprises me. For most of my adult life, I'd lived 2 states away from my parents, not far enough to feel estranged, but far enough that visits required planning, time off work, and a certain emotional readiness. I was 36, single and working as a project coordinator for a small architectural firm. My days were structured and calm: coffee at 7, emails by 8, lunch at my desk with a book propped open. Evenings were quiet, usually just me, my houseplants, and whatever soup I'd made on Sunday. I liked my life. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, and after a childhood that felt like constant adjustment, steadiness mattered to me. My parents, Margaret and Thomas, had always been the kind of people who believed family meant availability. My younger sister, Emily, lived 10 minutes from them with her husband, Ryan, and their 2 kids, Noah and Lily. Emily was the sun in my parents' solar system, bright, busy, always in motion. She had a way of making chaos look charming. I had been the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who filled in the gaps. That pattern had followed us into adulthood. When my mom called in early November, her voice was warm in that way that immediately softened me. "Clara, sweetheart," she said, stretching my name. "We were hoping you'd come home for Christmas this year. It's been too long." I remember looking around my apartment while she spoke. The fern by the window, the mug ring on my desk, my coat draped over the chair. I hadn't planned to travel. Work was busy. Flights were expensive, but the way she said it made it sound like an offering, like she missed me. "I don't know, Mom," I said. "It's a lot this year." "We'll take care of everything," she replied quickly. "You just come be with us." I said yes because I wanted to believe her. The drive down took 6 hours. Snow flurried in thin lines across the windshield, and I played old songs I used to listen to in college. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house was lit up like it always was at Christmas. White lights trimmed the roof, a wreath on the door, everything looked the same, comfortingly so. Mom hugged me tight when I stepped inside, her sweater soft against my cheek. "You look tired," she said, already pulling back to examine me. "I drove straight through," I replied. Dad smiled from his chair, newspaper folded neatly. "Good to have you home, kiddo." It felt good for about an hour. Then Emily arrived. She came in like a gust of cold air and laughter, kids bundled in coats, Ryan carrying bags of gifts. The house filled instantly with noise. Noah ran straight for the living room. Lily clung to Emily's leg, whining. Emily kissed me on the cheek. "Clara, you made it." She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes I hadn't noticed before. Ryan seemed distracted, phone buzzing in his hand. Dinner was crowded but pleasant. We passed dishes, talked about weather and work. I told a story about a client who kept changing their mind about a staircase. Everyone laughed politely. The kids spilled juice. Mom wiped it up. After dessert, Emily leaned over and said quietly, "Hey, can we talk later?" It didn't strike me as strange. Sisters talk. That night, as I unpacked in my old room, I noticed a folded playpen leaning against the wall, a stack of children's books on the dresser, a baby monitor charging near the outlet. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at those things, telling myself not to read into it. The first clue came the next morning. I woke early, jet-lagged from nothing but a long drive. The house was quiet. I padded into the kitchen and started coffee. As I waited for it to brew, I heard my parents' bedroom door open and close softly. Then Emily's voice. Low, urgent. I couldn't hear words, just tone, something hushed and rushed. I told myself it was about holiday plans, about gifts. When Emily finally came into the kitchen, she looked relieved to see me. "Oh good, you're up." "Morning," I said. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Yeah, just a lot going on." We sat at the table, steam rising from our mugs. She tapped her fingers against the ceramic. "So, Ryan and I were thinking of taking a little trip after Christmas, just a few days." "That sounds nice," I said genuinely. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mom mentioned you're here until New Year." "Yes." Another pause. "You're always so good with Noah and Lily." I felt something tighten in my chest just slightly. "They're great kids." She nodded. "We'll talk later." By the afternoon, it was clear that later was coming whether I wanted it or not. Mom asked me to watch Lily while she wrapped gifts. Dad needed help setting up lights outside. Emily disappeared with Ryan for a walk that lasted 2 hours. By dinner, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with travel. That night they sat me down at the dining table, all three of them, like a meeting. Emily went first. "Clara, we wouldn't ask if we had any other option." Mom placed her hand over Emily's. "Your sister, been under so much stress." Ryan cleared his throat. "Work been intense." I waited. Emily exhaled. "We booked a trip just 4 days. We leave the 26th. Mom and Dad are coming with us." I blinked. "All of you?" "Yes," Mom said quickly. "It was such a good deal." "And the kids?" I asked, already knowing. Emily looked at me with practiced softness. "They'll stay here with you." The room went quiet. I could hear the clock ticking, my pulse in my ears. "You want me to babysit?" I said. "Just for a few days," Mom replied. "You don't have anything planned." I looked from face to face. The expectation was already there, settled like dust. "I came home to spend time with you," I said slowly. "And you will," Emily said. "This is family time too." I didn't say yes, not right away, but I didn't say no either, and that was enough. Over the next 2 days it became official without ever being discussed again. Emily packed bags, Mom made lists, Dad set out emergency numbers, the baby monitor was plugged in, instructions taped to the fridge. I watched it all happen like I was underwater. On the morning they left, Emily hugged me quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're a lifesaver." Mom kissed my cheek. "Call if you need anything." Dad waved from the car. And then they were gone. The house felt different immediately, quieter, heavier. Noah asked where his parents were. I told him they'd be back soon. Lily cried at bedtime. I rocked her in the chair where my mother used to read to me, listening to the baby monitor hum. By the 3rd night I was running on caffeine and muscle memory. Meals, baths, stories, sleep. I hadn't checked my work email once. My phone buzzed with photos from Emily's trip. Beach sunsets, smiling faces. I didn't reply. It wasn't until the 4th night, when Lily woke up sick and I couldn't reach anyone, that something inside me finally cracked. I sat on the kitchen floor, holding a feverish child who wasn't mine, realizing that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, one I'd been stepping into my whole life. And for the first time, I started to wonder what would happen if I stepped out of it. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Lily's fever finally broke sometime around 3 in the morning, her small body relaxing against mine, as if she'd decided I was safe enough to rest on. I stayed in the rocking chair long after her breathing evened out, staring at the faint glow of the Christmas lights through the living room doorway. The house creaked the way it always had, familiar sounds that once meant comfort. That night they felt like witnesses. By sunrise, I was running on a strange mix of adrenaline and clarity. I made oatmeal for Noah, cutting up a banana the way Emily usually did. I found the children's medicine without looking, measured the dose by memory, wiped down the counter while the kettle boiled. It hit me then how naturally I'd slipped into this role, not because I loved it, though I did love those kids, but because I'd been trained for it. Quiet competence had always been my currency in this family. When Noah asked Aunt Clara, a grandma and grandpa on vacation too, I paused longer than necessary. "Yes," I said, "they'll be back soon." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to lining up his toy cars. After breakfast, I finally checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my boss, a text that read everything okay, we need the revisions by Friday. I stared at it, feeling a slow burn of anger that surprised me with its heat. I hadn't taken time off to become an unpaid nanny. I had taken time off to be a daughter. I called Emily first, straight to voicemail. Then my mom. It rang longer than usual before she picked up. Clara, she said, like she'd been expecting me to call. Lily was sick last night, I said. I couldn't reach anyone. There was a pause, waves in the background, someone laughing. Oh, she said, poor thing, is she better? Yes, I replied. But Mom, I need to know why no one told me the full plan. Another pause, heavier this time. We didn't think you'd mind. That sentence, so small, so practiced. I do mind, I said quietly. Well, she replied, voice tightening just slightly, you've always been so independent. We thought this wouldn't be a burden. A burden, that word sat between us like something sharp. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small tasks and big thoughts. Every time Noah laughed, guilt tugged at me for feeling resentful. Every time Lily clung to me, exhaustion pulled me under. I loved them, but love wasn't consent. That evening, while the kids napped, I went into my parents' bedroom. I hadn't planned to snoop, but something drew me there. Maybe I needed proof that this hadn't been a misunderstanding. On the nightstand, beneath my mother's reading glasses, was a folded itinerary. I recognized Emily's handwriting on the top corner. Flights booked weeks ago. Weeks. My hands shook as I refolded the paper. This wasn't last minute. This wasn't desperation. This was a decision made without me, counting on my silence. When the kids woke up, I made dinner and read stories like nothing had changed. But inside, something had shifted. A quiet resolve was forming. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. The next morning I called my boss and explained the situation. He listened, then sighed. Take care of what you need to take care of, he said. We'll manage. I appreciated his understanding, but it stung that a man who wasn't family showed more consideration than the people who raised me. That afternoon I packed a small bag for myself. Not to leave the kids, I would never do that, but to be ready. When Emily finally called back that evening, I answered on the first ring. Hey, she said, breezy, everything okay? No, I replied, we need to talk. She laughed lightly, you sound serious. I am. I told her about Lily's fever, about the itinerary, about the missed calls. There was silence on the other end this time, real silence. You could have said no, she finally said. That's not how this family works, I replied. You know that. She sighed, we needed a break, Clara. You don't understand how hard it is. I do understand, I said. What I don't understand is why my time and my life are always considered flexible. She didn't answer. I'll take care of the kids until you get back, I continued. But things are going to change after that. Her voice sharpened. What does that mean? It means I'm done being assumed, I said. She hung up without saying goodbye. That night after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. I wrote down everything I'd done since arriving, every favor, every time I'd adjusted my life to fit theirs. The list was longer than I expected. I wasn't writing it for them, I was writing it for myself. When my parents and Emily returned 2 days later, the house filled with noise again. Suitcases rolled across the floor, voices overlapped. Emily hugged the kids tightly, tears in her eyes. Mom smiled at me like nothing had happened. Everything go okay? I nodded, we need to talk. Her smile faltered. We sat at the dining table, the same place they'd sat me down days earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I love this family, I began, but I won't be treated like an afterthought anymore. Mom opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. I'm not asking for an apology, I'm setting a boundary. But Emily crossed her arms. Dad looked down at the table. I came home to reconnect, I continued. Instead, I was assigned a role without being asked. That can't happen again. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said, but intention doesn't erase impact. The room was quiet, uncomfortable, necessary. Emily finally spoke. We should have asked. Yes, I replied, you should have. I left the next morning. The drive home felt different, lighter, not because everything was fixed but because something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, I was resolved. Weeks later, Emily called to apologize, really apologize. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. My parents are still adjusting, so am I. What I've learned is this: love doesn't require self-erasure. Family doesn't mean obligation without consent. And sometimes the hardest part of growing up isn't leaving home, it's deciding who you're willing to be when you return. I thought leaving would bring immediate relief, that once the car crossed the state line, whatever knot had formed in my chest would finally loosen. But healing doesn't work that way. It moves slower, quieter, and sometimes it asks you to sit with feelings you've avoided for years. The first week back home, my apartment felt unfamiliar, not because anything had changed, but because I had. The silence wasn't comforting anymore, it echoed. I'd grown used to the steady rhythm of little feet, the hum of the baby monitor, the way my day had revolved around someone else's needs. Now it was just me again. And for the first time I realized how rarely I'd ask myself what I needed. Emily didn't call for a while after I left, neither did my parents. I told myself it was because they were busy, or embarrassed, or giving me space. But late at night, when I lay awake listening to the radiator click on and off, I wondered if my honesty had finally made me inconvenient. Then the calls started. Not to check on me, not to ask how I was doing. To explain. My mother left a long voicemail one evening while I was making soup. I let it play as I chopped onions, the knife hitting the cutting board in steady beats. Clara, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, your father and I never meant for you to feel taken for granted. We were just trying to keep the peace. Emily's been so overwhelmed, and you've always been so capable. Capable, that word again, a compliment that had become a cage. Dad sent a short text the next day. Didn't realize it hit you that hard, we'll talk soon. Emily finally called a week later. She didn't start with an apology, she started with frustration. You embarrassed Mom, she said. She told Aunt Susan what happened, and now everyone's acting like we did something terrible. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the couch. Emily, you did do something terrible. We're family, she snapped. Families help each other. They also ask, I replied calmly. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know how it looked? She continued. Like we abandoned our kids. You did, I said, not harshly, just truthfully. The line went dead. That was when the public part began, not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in the slow, uncomfortable spread of truth through a family network that thrived on selective storytelling. At Sunday dinners I wasn't present for, my absence was noticed. At church, people asked my mother how I was. At a cousin's birthday party, someone mentioned how nice it must have been for Emily to get a break. And my mother, who had spent years smoothing things over, didn't quite know how to respond anymore. Because the story, as it turned out, didn't sound so innocent when told out loud. She came home for Christmas, someone said, and you all left the kids with her. Well, Mom would reply, faltering, she didn't mind. But I did mind, and the truth had a way of slipping through the cracks. Emily felt it first. Friends stopped nodding along. A few asked why she hadn't arranged childcare. One joked, you owe your sister big time. At first Emily brushed it off, then she got defensive, then she got quiet. The consequence wasn't punishment, it was exposure, the kind that forces you to sit with yourself. For me, the consequence was internal. I started noticing how often I overextended at work, how quickly I volunteered, how rarely I said no without offering an explanation. I saw the pattern everywhere, not just in my family. So I started practicing, small things at first. No, I can't stay late tonight. I'll need more notice next time. I'm not available. Each time I said it, my heart raced. Each time the world didn't end. Emily came to visit in early March, alone. She stood awkwardly in my doorway, hands in her coat pockets. Can we talk? We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd once eaten quiet dinners without thinking twice. I didn't realize how much I leaned on you, she said finally. I thought you were just okay with it. I was okay with helping, I replied. I wasn't okay with being assumed. She nodded, eyes glossy. I'm sorry. It wasn't a perfect apology, it didn't undo the past, but it was real. I don't want us to be like this, she added. Neither do I said, but it can't be the same as before. She understood that, I could tell. My parents took longer, old habits die slowly, but things shifted. Invitations came with questions instead of expectations. Visits were discussed, not declared. It wasn't seamless, but it was progress. The real healing, though, happened quietly. One evening, months later, I was invited to babysit, actually invited. Emily asked weeks in advance, offered to pay, gave me an out. I said yes, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to. And that made all the difference. As I drove home that night, windows cracked open to let in the cool air, I realized something important. Boundaries hadn't pushed my family away. They had reshaped the relationship into something more honest. I was still Clara, still the dependable one, but now I was also someone who chose when and how to give. And that choice changed everything. There was a moment late spring when I realized how much had actually changed. It wasn't dramatic, no argument, no big announcement, just a quiet, ordinary moment that would have gone unnoticed before. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry, the windows open, traffic humming faintly below. Clara, she said, careful in a way she'd never been before, I wanted to ask you something. That alone made me pause. Yes, I replied. Your father and I were thinking of visiting Emily next month, just for a weekend. Would that overlap with anything you have going on? I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was unfamiliar. My parents had never asked about my schedule unless it directly affected theirs. No, I said, that should be fine. All right, she said, relieved. I just wanted to make sure. After we hung up, I stood there holding a warm towel in my hands, realizing that respect doesn't always arrive with an apology. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as a question. That summer, I started therapy. I didn't go because of one big crisis. I went because I was tired of feeling like my worth came from how useful I was. I wanted to understand why saying no still made my stomach tighten, why I felt guilty resting, why love to me had always felt conditional. My therapist was a calm woman named Janet who listened more than she spoke. During one session, after I'd spent 10 minutes explaining my family dynamics, she said gently, "It sounds like you learned early on that harmony depended on you not having needs." The sentence landed harder than I expected. I thought back to childhood Christmases, to being praised for being easy, to teachers telling my parents how responsible I was, to Emily crying in her room while I quietly cleaned up the mess she'd made, because it felt easier than adding to the noise. I had been trained to disappear politely. Namming it didn't fix everything, but it gave me language, and language gave me choice. In August, Emily invited me to Noah's birthday party. The invitation came with details, times, and a simple line at the end, no pressure at all. I went. The party was loud and chaotic and imperfect. Kids ran through sprinklers, someone burned the hot dogs, Emily looked tired but happy. Ryan made a point of thanking me for coming, really thanking me. At one point, Emily pulled me aside. Mom offered to stay overnight and help clean up, she said, rolling her eyes fondly. I told her no. That surprised me. You did. She nodded. I'm trying not to pass things down. I smiled. It was the first time I saw her not as the one who took, but as someone learning too. Later that evening, as I helped Noah open presents, he looked up at me and said, "Aunt Clara, you're fun." It was such a small thing, but it made my chest ache. For so long I'd been useful, reliable, necessary. Being fun felt like a gift. The real test came that winter. Another holiday season, another invitation home. This time when my mom called, she said, "We'd love to have you, but only if you actually want to come. No obligations." I thought about it, really thought. I pictured the house, the lights, the memories, the old rolls waiting quietly in the corners. "I'd like to come for a few days," I said, "but I'll be staying at a hotel." There was a brief silence. "Of course," she replied, "whatever makes you comfortable." When I arrived, nothing looked different, but everything felt different. I left when I needed rest. I stayed when I wanted connection. When Emily asked if I could watch the kids one afternoon, she added, "If not, no worries at all." I said yes and meant it. On Christmas Eve after dinner, my dad poured himself a drink and sat beside me on the couch. The room smelled like pine and sugar cookies. "You know," he said, staring at the tree, "your mom and I relied on you more than we should have." I waited. "We thought we were teaching you responsibility," he continued. "I think we forgot to ask what it cost you." He didn't look at me when he said it, but his voice was steady, honest. "I didn't know how to say no," I replied softly. "I know," he said, "I'm sorry." That was enough. Not because it erased the past, but because it acknowledged it. When I drove back home after the holidays, I didn't feel drained. I felt full in a way that didn't require recovery. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still moments when old habits tugged at me, still times when Emily slipped into assumption, still days when my mother sighed dramatically instead of asking directly. But now I noticed, and I responded differently. The biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. I no longer measured my value by how much I could carry. I no longer believed that love required exhaustion. I stopped waiting for permission to take up space. And in doing so, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing. Peace. Not loud peace, not dramatic peace. Just the quiet kind that shows up when you finally stop abandoning yourself. I think about that night in the kitchen sometimes, the blinking oven clock, the baby monitor in my hand, the way I felt invisible in my own childhood home. I wish I could reach back and tell that version of myself something. You're allowed to be more than helpful, you're allowed to be asked, you're allowed to choose. And if you're listening to this and something about it feels familiar, I want you to know this. You don't owe anyone your silence, you don't owe anyone your exhaustion. Love that costs you your voice is too expensive. Before I go, I want to leave you with one last thought. So many of us grow up believing that being loved means being needed, that if we are useful enough, quiet enough, flexible enough, we'll earn our place at the table. And for a long time that belief can feel like love, until one day you realize you're tired in a way rest doesn't fix. I didn't lose my family by speaking up, I didn't break anything by setting boundaries. What I lost was a role that was never meant to define me, and what I gained was something far more steady. Self-respect, choice, peace. If you've ever been the one who fills the gaps, who shows up without being asked, who carries things no one notices until you stop, I see you. And I hope you know that you're allowed to be more than the person everyone leans on. So let me ask you this. If you stopped saying yes out of guilt, what might finally open up in your life? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever been placed in a role you didn't agree to, simply because you were capable? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, please share it with them. Sometimes, the reminder that we're allowed to choose is the greatest gift we can give each other. Thank you for spending this time with me. My name is Clara, and this was the story of the holiday I went home expecting love and came back with something even more important.